So the next area of the brain, moving down, back into the body from cerebrum down, is differentiated from the cerebrum by this area. This, of course, is the corpus callosum, and this would be the septum pellucidum, which is a thin layer that contains the lateral ventricle, and where this would separate the cerebrum from the diencephalon, which is really contained here. Okay, so again, much of the diencephalon surrounds the third ventricle. So this lateral ventricle is continuous with that third ventricle, which is right in this area. Most of the diencephalon is gray matter, so lots and lots of cell bodies. To the information it gets is from the rest of the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system send information through the diencephalon. It then sends information onto the cerebrum and kind of directs it. So we consider this a relay area as well. The exception to the sensory is olfaction, which does go directly to the cerebrum. It does not pass through the diencephalon. So the diencephalon consists of thalamus, hypothalamus, optic tracts, optic chiasm, pituitary mammillary bodies, pineal gland, also known as the epithalamus, and the subthalamus, which is part of the basal nuclei. So this is again an overview of this. So the thalamus, again shown here in this green, is actually two lobes that you're looking at here together, right? And there's this connection between the two lobes, so often it's described as yo-yo in appearance. So here's one half, right? One of these lobes, this one here, is shown here. So this interthalamic adhesion is this joining to the other half that's missing on this picture. All right, so the most of your sensory input, again, except for olfaction, smell, right, ascends through the cord in the brainstem to the thalamus. So it comes all the way up from out in the body, right, in all these variety of areas all over the body, and it will synapse with neurons, interneurons here in the thalamus. Thalamic axons then relate, so it's a relay station. It's going to send it on and figure out where that action potential, that's stimuli, should go. I say here that thalamus does do a little bit of processing. It decides which stimuli are important and which ones should receive attention. So there is some selection going on by the thalamus. But this doesn't operate on a conscious level. All right, so the hypothalamus, which is this area just below, right, so hypo below the thalamus, I always say look for that W. Lots and lots of gray matter here. Links the nervous system with the endocrine. Okay, so here is a pituitary gland, which is a primary gland for the endocrine, and in this area, this infundibulum that connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary, is a whole lot of axons from the hypothalamus going down into the pituitary gland and influencing it. All right, so again, it's inferior hypothalamus. Nuclei here are important in maintaining a lot of different homeostatic processes. It is in charge of the autonomic nervous system, so a lot of influence on the autonomic nervous system begins in the hypothalamus. Body temperature, hunger, thirst, electrolyte balance are all things that are the responsibilities of the hypothalamus. It has a role in sexual pleasure, relaxation, rage, and fear, so emotions and moods are part of the hypothalamus as well. The mammillary bodies, which are two very small swellings just behind the pituitary, are involved in memory and emotional responses to smell. So smell is a very powerful sensation for us. The infundibulum, again, is basically the connection between the pituitary and the hypothalamus, and it consists of mostly axons from the hypothalamus. The brainstem, then moving on down, right? So past here's our diencephalon. The pineal gland, I failed to mention that on the slides, but the pineal gland is actually part of the endocrine system, from what we understand, and makes this hormone melatonin, which helps us understand light and dark cycles and regulates our seasons, and therefore might regulate puberty as well. So it's this little bulge found right about here. We'll look at that in lab for sure. Okay, so brainstem, also involuntary, unconscious or subconscious, if you will. like the diencephalon. There's a mid and a hindbrain to this, as we talked about in the development. The midbrain is going to have a few features we look at, the pons, and then the medulla is the last area before we leave the skull through the foramen magnum and become spinal cord. Of course, damage to this part of the brain will kill you because you see that nuclei here, right, especially in the medulla, control heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, and vomiting and sneezing and swallowing, a variety of different bodily functions. Cranial nerves connect through the brainstem, except for two, and that would be the olfactory and the optic. All right, but all the other cranial nerves we're going to talk about later on are going to actually be connecting, coming in through the brainstem. This also contains the major ascending and descending pathways, so this is a conduit as well for, again, ascending that's going to come up to the thalamus, a lot of it, right, and the descending coming back down from the cerebellum as well as the cerebellum, which isn't shown here. Okay, so this again connects the spinal cord to the brain, the rest of the brain, the diencephalon and the cerebrum. Consists of medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain. All right, so the midbrain, when we look at this, so here we have part of the diencephalon still shown here, pineal, and this will be very easy to see the pineal body or pineal gland on the sheep brains. And so we're looking from the posterior back on to the brain here. This is midbrain here. This is a posterior. We're looking for the posterior view of the brain. And there's these four bodies. This is the reason it's called the corpora body. It's corpora. Corpora quadremina. Quad is four. The four are divided into the upper two and the lower two, which would be upper would be superior, lower would be inferior, and then they're called the colliculus or colliculi for plural. So this is the vast majority of what you see and know as the midbrain. The midbrain is separated by a cerebral aqueduct, which you can't see here, but that again from the posterior and anterior aspects. All right, it is the smallest region, superior to the pons, so above the pons, with a cerebral aqueduct running through it. There's the tectum, which is roof, and again, your models aren't made to show this. The corpora quadremina, you will see on your models, and you'll identify on the sheep as well. All right. The inferior ones, you should know, are responsible for auditory pathways, so things that have to do with hearing reflexes. The superior ones are involved in visual reflexes, orienting the eyes to a sound or touch, and it helps correlate, right, auditory and visual maps. So again, understanding the world around you is really important to survival. And so much of what we do is done automatic. Like if you see something in the corner of your eye, you turn towards that, right? Or if you hear a sound, turning towards that kind of thing. Okay? The tegmentum is the floor of this, and there's nuclei that send and receive through the cranial nerves here. But again, you can't see that on your models or these pictures, so the tectum and the tegmentum are not part of what I ask you guys to know. All right? Pons is the bridge, so now I'm looking from the front, right, back towards, right? So I'm looking from this back onto the brain. And the pons is a bulge you see anteriorly, and pons means bridge, and it kind of looks like a little footbridge, and it does function. So not only appears like that, it functions as a bridge. It bridges the cerebellum to the cerebrum. Okay, so the pons again contains ascending and descending tracts, so these collections of axons going up and onto the cerebrum and coming down from the cerebrum. There are nuclei here which help with breathing and a few other reflexes. And again, it is coordinating information between the cerebellum and the cerebrum. Nuclei here control, again, breathing, chewing, salivation, are some of the responsibilities we give to the pons. Lower pons has nuclei that, again, assist the medulla with breathing, swallowing, and balance. So, and balance is a pretty profound sensory sensation perception in our when we think about all the different parts of the brain involved. The yellow here is actually looking at these cranial nerves we talked about here. Again, I said the cranial nerves, all but two of them come through the brainstem. And so you're seeing the oculomotors here, and these are going to be the trochlear and the trigeminal, which are huge, right? And then this is abducens and the facial and vestibulocochlear, right? Accessories here, and vagus nerve and glossopharyngeal are all along here on the medulla. So We'll look at those in more detail, but that's what you're seeing here in the yellow, are the actual cranial nerves. Here, whoops, sorry. All right, the medulla is probably the most insignificant and most important part of the brainstem. It is continuous to the spinal cord, goes from the foramen magnum to the pons. You can see pyramids or the swellings, but these swellings represent the descending and nerve tracts, and also ascending come through here. But the nuclei found here regulate heart rate, blood vessel diameter, breathing rate, swallowing, vomiting, coughing, sneezing, a lot of a variety of things. So this is an area we really have to keep protected. In the brainstem is also this group called the reticular formation, shown here in this kind of golden color. This also shows you a few other features here. Again, we've got the entire diencephalon here. Oops, diencephalon here. Looks like kind of a bird. And then the corpus callosum and the lateral ventricle. And so here's our brainstem, right, moving into the spinal cord. So the reticular formation is scattered in the brainstem, and there's groups of nuclei that connect. And this part of the brain is responsible for our sleep and wake cycles, our consciousness. If there's damage to this part of the brain, the result is a coma. It is able to filter some of the sensory and pass on the important ones again. So like the thalamus, it's doing some selection of our information. All right, so the cerebellum is the last part we'll talk about, and I think I'll pick this up on the next video so that we kind of separate. I don't think we'll have enough time on this one, so we'll stop here and pick up cerebellum later.